I grew up
Yeah.
eating Twinkies, and people don't think that was weird. Oh, you're a vegan? Oh, well, you're nuts. Who are you? You're radical. You're extreme. What's radical about caring about my health, caring about animals, and caring about God's world? What's radical about that?
And, for people that think that this thinking or this type of lifestyle is extreme, to be honest with you, what's more extreme is that in America, for children, 60 to 70% of their diet is coming from ultra processed foods. That's insane. And no one's like, oh, that's extreme.
Right. Totally.
People call that convenience.
Right. It's like, okay, but Shabbos doesn't have to be like that. You think Moshe Rabbeinu ate kugel? Come on. Let's get real.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Frum Health Club Podcast. I'm your host, Mendo Krashinsky. Here at the Frum Health Club, we believe that health isn't separate from our Yiddishkeit, it's all part of it. When we strengthen our bodies and prioritize a healthy lifestyle, we become better able to serve Hashem, our families, and our communities with energy, strength, and clarity. Today, we're joined by Akiva Gersh, known to many as the Vegan Rabbi. Akiva grew up in the US, eating a typical American diet and feeling disconnected from Yiddishkeit. In high school and college, he became deeply involved in environmental activism. After realizing the massive impact modern society has on animals and the planet, he became vegetarian and shortly after, fully vegan at just 19 years old. At the same time, he began a spiritual search that eventually led him to a yeshiva in Tzfat and the deep connection with Torah and Jewish life. Today, he lives in Israel with his wife Tamar and their 4 children, and has been educating thousands of students for over 25 years, speaking about conscious living, compassion, and plant-based health. Akiva, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Great to be here. Thanks so much.
Wonderful. So if you could maybe start off by taking us back to when you were 19 years old, what was going through your mind and why did you decide to become a vegan?
So 19 years old, so I'm now 50, just to give you some context. It was about 31 years ago, and I was in college. And like you mentioned in the intro, my first year in college specifically, I had so many realizations and epiphanies about our world. Once I left my suburban bubble that I grew up in outside of New York City, and just realized many things that year, specifically the multitude of ways that we, modern day humans, are impacting the world and everything in it very negatively through seemingly innocent everyday actions, just the choices that we make, which don't seem like bad choices. What we buy, what we eat, what we wear, what we use, products that we use. On some level, there's no reason even to think about our choices, because why would they do such harm? But once you start to probe and start to see beneath the surface, you realize that unfortunately, because of the way that the modern day world is set up, that almost everything we do is having some kind of negative impact on the world, on the environment, on all life forms that live in it. And that year, that was a strong realization for me, and I made a decision that I want to do my best to minimize the negative impact of my lifestyle choices, just my lifestyle at all. And one of the things I did as a result was become an environmental studies major, and in addition became vegetarian. And like you said, shortly after that, I became vegan to make sure that my food choices are, again, minimizing a negative impact on the world.
Wow, that's so interesting. How did your you could say family, or in general, like friends, family, react to you choosing to be vegan?
So back then it wasn't as popular. It wasn't as easy. Health food stores were like the size of, big closets. And there wasn't much variety, nothing like today. This was the pre-Whole Foods, kind of world.
Wow. Wow.
You go into the supermarket, you see like 1 or 2 kinds of soy milk, one type of tofu, and then the rest is just like grains and beans. And it was fine. Like that's what we did, You got yourself a vegan cookbook and you started cooking. But it's interesting because I have a twin sister actually, and she went vegan before I did.
Oh,
She
wow.
she got into environmental issues in college already, became vegetarian and vegan in high school. Did I say college? High school, I mean. In high school, she got involved with these things. So she became vegetarian and then vegan a good 3 or 4 years before I did. So I heard a lot of the arguments in favor of this lifestyle, but like everybody else, I thought it was nonsense and I didn't agree with it. And though my sister and I were very close and still are. I would make fun of her and all those things. And then that first year in college, everything just came together. I realized like everything she was saying was totally right, was totally true, and I just felt this tremendous need to make a change. So it wasn't crazy difficult. In college, people try out vegetarianism, veganism, they're trying out different things. So it wasn't
Yeah.
like, it's the only person doing it, but definitely wasn't the minority. And yeah, I mean, like you said in the intro, like I grew up eating like, lots of meat, lots of white bread, no vegetables whatsoever, very unhealthy, typical American diet. So I literally had to relearn how to eat. That was the most challenging thing, but I did it, I would even say with joy because I was so committed to it. Once I made the decision, like I was in, like I knew that this was it.
Huh.
This is how I want to live. So I explored, I experimented. I was eating foods I never ate before, and it was great. And I realized, wow, there's so many incredible foods out there. From a Jewish perspective, eventually I'd come to say that, like, wow, Hashem blessed us with all of this incredible diversity of food, whether it's color, taste,
So true.
texture, smell, outside of like food that comes from animals. Like we have such an abundance of food, and I discovered that once I became vegetarian and then vegan.
Wow. Wow. So, and of course, you shared that later on you also became closer to Yiddishkeit, you became religious. How was that like navigating through, becoming religious and vegan? How was that process like?
Yeah, so there's a whole story of like how I became religious, but it really was prompted by my environmentalism and by my veganism, which
Wow.
is usually not the way that people become, religious. But really, in my third year in college, I was in a special program for environmental studies, and I had a professor who was really, really amazing. I was really close with her. And I had all these like deep, like life kind of conversations with her. And one of the things I was really feeling at the time is that I felt like I was lacking culture. I was getting really into like anthropology and reading about other cultures around the world.
Mm,
And it just made me reflect on my own. I'm like, what's my culture? Like I grew up going to the
wow.
mall, like what do I have? And I felt, I started feeling a real deep longing and yearning to have something more cultural, spiritual in my life. And she looks at me one day. She's like, "You're Jewish, right?" I was the only Jewish person on the program. I'm like, "Yeah." Like, what does that have to do with anything? She's like, "Do you realize how rich your culture is?" I'm like, "No." She's like, "Do you realize how amazing the Jewish people are?" I'm like, "No." And so she started feeding me articles. As an environmentalist, she started feeding me articles
Wow.
about Judaism and the environment. There are actually articles out there. This is 1995, just to give you some context, okay? She started giving me these articles, and I was blown away. I couldn't believe it that Judaism talks about environmental ethics. There are environmental laws in the Torah. There are animal welfare laws in the Torah. I couldn't believe it. So that was like my first kind
Wow.
of opening to exploring Judaism because of that. I remember the first time I started learning the Parsha and came, I actually started with Bereshit and got to 29 lines in, got to the fact that Adam and Eve were given a vegan diet by God, by Hashem. I couldn't believe it. I put the book down. I'm like, what? Adam and Eve were vegan? Like, what's going on here? So a lot of those things like really just widened and widened. That door that was opening for me. And then also spiritually, I was really looking for something spiritual. Um, and just like I found all these environmental animal welfare teachings in Judaism, I started to find all these incredible spiritual teachings that I was looking for. I was looking for in other traditions, in other isms, and now I was seeing them in my
Wow.
own tradition.
Wow.
Mysticism and the soul and all these different things. So once I became, more connected, and I spent some time in Sfat and Yeshiva, I came back to New York, and I lived in Monsey, New York, for 5 years before I got married, and then eventually made Aliyah. But it was interesting. My diet was like the center of conversation for years. Because I was new in the community, so almost every Shabbat I was going to somebody else's house who I didn't know. They didn't know me, and when they would
Yeah.
pass me the meat, and I said, "Oh, I don't eat that." Like, why not? "Oh, I'm vegan." Like
Mm.
the next 2 hours, all about that. And people were
Can imagine.
amazing. They
Yeah.
were super sweet. They were so respectful, but they were just really curious. I never really met
Curious. Yeah.
an Orthodox vegan.
Wow.
And sometimes people give me, pushback and challenge me, whatever. But I look at those years, those first few years of being religious and being a vegan at people's Shabbos tables as kind of boot camp. It really helped me to like put together my argument and solidify my
Mm.
stance from a Jewish perspective. And ever since then, I've been just, literally collecting sources that support, caring about animals, caring about the environment, health, eating in a healthy way, all these things that combine really support a vegan lifestyle in our world today.
Yeah. Why do you think there's not that many Orthodox Jewish vegan people?
So I recently put out a video entitled "Why Are More Rabbis Not Vegan?" But I think it can
Mm,
go for Orthodox Jews in general. It's the same thing. So I go through a few different points as to why there are not more Orthodox vegans, and after giving each of the points, I kind of counter each point. I think they can be easily countered. But I think is, what one strong thing is tradition. It's what my parents did. It's what my grandparents did. It's what,
mm,
it's what we do. We eat brisket on Rosh Hashanah. We eat meat on Shabbos. It's like, okay, tradition is very important in Judaism, but it doesn't override law and values. And if this meat is now coming from places that treat animals horribly and cause pain and suffering to animals, which goes against a Torah commandment of Torah B'Chaim. So we have to review the custom. Customs are great; they don't override laws and Jewish values. So that's one thing. Also, rabbinic leadership. I'm not here to judge anyone, but like if my rabbi does it, so I do it. Like what? I'm better than my rabbi. I think that's a big thing for
mm.
people. My rabbi
Yeah.
eats meat. He has the chicken soup. He has the gefilte fish. All these different things. So I do it too. If he changed, maybe I'll change. But this is how we live. So this is how I live, right? So that's a very
Mm.
big force, obviously, in the Orthodox Jewish world. Although I'm learning about more and more rabbis who are becoming vegetarian or vegan, which is really, really amazing in the Orthodox world. Um, in addition to
Yeah, you
that,
shared it in the group. I had no idea that the head rabbi of Tzfat is vegetarian.
yeah, vegetarian. Yeah. And one of
No
the big
idea.
breast of
So interesting.
rabbis in Israel is vegan. It's very interesting. And I would just, share maybe one more thing about that is, um, we, I think there's an error being made. I say this with as much humility as I can muster, but people so often, all the time, they will quote, the Rambam, in Simcha b'vasav v'yayin, right? Got to be happy on the
Mm,
holidays. You have to, but you have to. There's this understanding that it's an obligation to eat meat on Yom Tov, Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, and even they extend that to Shabbat. When you look in the law books, you look in the Sefer Halacha, like now the Shulchan Aruch doesn't mention it, right? Pnei Halacha doesn't mention it. All these other places do not mention it. The Shulchan Aruch Rav that says very, very clearly that it's not a chova, it's not an obligation. The couple of places where I've seen brought down an opinion that maybe it is an obligation, always have the caveat, but if someone doesn't like it or it causes them damage, of course, there's no obligation. So,
yeah.
which if we then go backwards and say, nobody would ever say, oh, if keeping Shabbos isn't like, someone doesn't like it or like it somehow does damage to them, I can't imagine how, so they're not obligated in it anymore. Like you would never see that with anything else in Judaism. So the fact that
Exactly.
that's even
Yeah.
being said shows us that it's not an obligation,
Mm,
right? It was only an obligation when the Beit HaMikdash stood in Yerushalayim, and there was korbanot, and then the Chagim, and all that. So I think that's a misunderstanding that a lot of people rely on to make the argument that you have to eat meat on Yom Tov and Shabbat.
mm. Could you share with us what were some of the main things that you saw, like differences that you felt when you became vegan in terms of your health and just overall energy and things like that?
Yeah, so I went from eating a very unhealthy diet. I mean, lots of meat, lots of processed foods, lots of white bread, lots of sugar. That's literally how I grew up. I didn't eat any vegetables, as I mentioned before.
Wow.
And so, yeah, I definitely felt like, my energy shift, change. It's been so long, I'll be totally honest with you. I don't remember the feeling anymore. Now, just how I am, but I do remember physically a shift, a change, but also spiritually and just my conscience. I felt better about what I was
Mm,
eating because I felt better about my food choices and I felt better about the impact of my food choices. So I felt that they were more aligned with my values. I mentioned like my twin sister. Like, you know, I, I I was trying to do good in the world in high school and more so in college. And when I brought veganism into it, that just felt like it was that made sense. If I'm trying to do something good in the world, if I'm really believing that we're here to be vehicles of positive change in the world, when it comes to my food choices, this felt like the best path, right? Why would I?
Mm.
What if Hashem blessed this world, like I said before, with so many different kinds of food, including protein-rich foods? I can get plenty of protein. I don't have to worry about protein, right? It's a joke in the vegan community, different kind of like graphics, memes, whatever, about the number of people who have died, the number of vegans who have died, God forbid, right? From protein deficiency. Zero. You never hear about it, right? It doesn't happen. Um, and so if I can choose a diet, a way of eating that is more compassionate, that doesn't cause suffering to God's creatures, these are God's creatures, right? Why would I not?
Hmm. So I have an interesting question. Do you feel that like back in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, the setup of how we treated animals, or maybe how animals were given over as karbanos and things like that, was it different than it is like now? Meaning, like, obviously it's a different process. It was being done for a different process, but they were eating afterwards. Depends on the carbon, but they were eating it, right? The Kohanim. Do you think that in general it was like a different setup of how we were just doing things, and that's why it's different now? Or
It's a really interesting question. I think a couple of things. One, just the world in general has so radically changed, right? The meat that people eat today, the meat and dairy and eggs and all that, they are not the
completely
same
different?
meat, dairy and eggs that our grandparents even, or great grandparents for sure ate. Just different.
100%.
My
Yeah.
my grandparents were from a shtetl in Poland, and I got to spend a lot of time with them towards the end of their life specifically. And I asked my grandmother all these questions about their life in a shtetl. They lived there into their 20s. It was the animals outside, having a life, and they feed it, they take care of it. At
Yeah.
the end of the life, they shecht it, okay, and they take eggs and they take. It was a different world. It was a different life, right? My grandmother could not imagine what veal was today. How veal is
Mm.
is a calf that never sees the light of day, is stuffed into a little crate. Eventually, within weeks, is too big to even turn around, and that's how the farmers keep the meat tender, like through cruelty and suffering. Right? I asked her, I'm like, did you guys eat meat? I'm sorry, veal in Poland? She said yes. I'm like, how? We just went to the field and took like the youngest calf, and that's what we would. But she
Wow.
also said that they barely ate meat back then, like a little piece of meat. Every time they had meat, it was like a little tiny piece of meat, nothing like these like crazy burgers, that people have any day
Yeah.
of the week that they want. It's a different world
Yeah.
that
It's
it's
a different world.
become
Yeah.
industrialized. It's become, just it's all about the money. So everything has to happen really quick, and
Yeah.
the less you care about the animals, the more money that you make. But going back to your question in terms of the Beit HaMikdash, yeah, that was a different system altogether, right? If you look at ancient Israel, right, the only time people were eating animals out of an obligation was in the Beit HaMikdash, right? Even on Yom Tov,
Yeah.
right? It was to eat the korban. It wasn't like up in the Galil making a barbecue on Yom Tov. That wasn't the obligation, right? The obligation was to eat from the korban in the Beit HaMikdash in Yerushalayim. So if you look at ancient Israel, you see the amount of obligatory meat eating that took place. It's minimal, especially compared to
Mm.
today, right? The Torah, right, didn't command anyone to eat meat outside the Beit HaMikdash ever,
Mm.
right? So just
Mm.
just the quantity is of obligation kind of eating is so minimal, and it was done with a different mindset. Ideally, right? We know unfortunately there was a lot of corruption in the temple as well. So I'm sure when things got really bad and corrupt, the Kohanim were not eating the way they were supposed to be eating, right? But we see in
Mm.
mysticism, we see in Kabbalah that specifically the eating of meat has to be done so carefully, right, with such focus and intention in order to elevate the sparks of meat. And the Gemara, we know the Gemara in Pesachim says that Am Haaretz is not allowed to eat meat, not allowed to eat meat, because
Mm.
and the Ben Ish Chai says on that that's because he can't properly do the spiritual elevation. That was 1,500 years ago that was written down, and Am Haaretz back then
Mm.
would be considered like probably you know, much, much higher today. So the big question is like, are people even on the
Yeah.
level to properly eat meat today in the Jewish world?
Mm. Wow. So interesting. Could you share with us, what does like a normal day in terms of eating look like for you? I think a lot of our listeners, viewers would be interested in knowing? If you could
For
share.
sure. So first got to start with tea and then coffee. Okay. I like to start my day off, come home from shul, I'll make a tea while I learn, um, then follow up with a coffee at some point in the morning. But in terms of the food that I'm eating, I'll just give you like an assortment of different things that I eat, throughout the day. I typically
Okay.
don't eat like breakfast. I'll usually wait till later in the morning to eat like my first, real meal. But I
Do you
tend
like
to,
intermittent fasting?
I've been doing it for a while now. Yeah, I'm like kind of starting to play with it. Like, how much do I, want to wait? But it has become kind of a natural thing. Like, I don't feel good eating right away in the morning. It feels too heavy.
Mm-hmm.
But even when I do eat, it's not like a big meal. I tend to have like smaller meals throughout the day. That's just kind of more like my body style metabolism. But anyway, in terms of foods that I'll eat anything, I'm just gonna list them off. A bowl of granola with rice milk and a cup banana. Smoothies. I love smoothies. So all different kinds of fruit. Maybe sometimes with peanut butter, sometimes with tahina. I like putting tahina in there. Um, Different combinations. Quinoa, quinoa salad, quinoa with cut veggies, maybe some chickpeas on top, maybe some roasted sunflower seeds, and a tahina dressing on top. Rice noodles and a veggie burger with some broccoli, a seitan, kind of like vegan shawarma, if you can imagine with seitan, but like wheat gluten.
Uh-huh.
You can get it gluten free as well. Seitan, made out of, I think it's chickpea flour. So kind of like a seitan. Sources of protein would be seitan, would be tofu, tempeh, all kinds of beans, nuts, seeds, things like that. And then all the vegetables, the sweet potatoes, soups. I mean, it's endless. There's just so much, Last night we actually had quinoa salad with roasted potatoes that I made. Um, this morning I had a bowl of granola and the banana. And sometimes there's leftovers from Shabbat, like curry chickpeas I like to make with rice. Um, Endless. There's so many things. And today, sometimes people reach out to me like, "Oh, can you give me a good vegan recipe for like a Shabbat meal?" I'm like, "Sure," but if you go on Google and put vegan recipes in, or go onto some social media and follow one vegan chef, you're set for life. There are so many
Yeah.
recipes out there accessible. You don't have to be a good chef. You don't have to be a cook. I'm not, right? I just follow recipes, and then the food comes out
Yeah.
good, and you get all that
Yeah.
you need. So yeah, that's pretty much, what my kind of food eating looks like each day. Pretty simple, not complex. I don't spend a lot of time in the kitchen, to be totally honest with you. I don't really want to. Um, but I eat foods that I enjoy and foods that give me everything I need.
Mm. Wow, nice. So I've mentioned this in the podcast in previous episodes. So are you familiar with the blue zones?
Yeah.
Yeah. So a couple of years ago, I read the book, Dan Bittner's book about the blue zones, and it was incredible to see that majority of these places, and just for viewers that maybe are listening for the first time about the blue zones, these are areas throughout the world where they did case studies and they saw that it's very normal for people to live over 100 years old, and they're healthy, and they're living incredible lives there. And they're all over the place, all over the world. And majority of them are not eating meat. The majority of them have a plant-based diet. Um, and if they are eating meat, it's maybe like once a month or two times a month or something like that. Why do you think that is? What's the connection? Why do you think a plant-based diet is so linked usually to longevity?
I think, and I can remember when I was a kid, when I was younger, a teenager, that when you eat meat, it fills you up a lot, right? Fills you up quick,
Hmm.
feel full, want that full feeling, and therefore you don't need to really eat much else. You're not gonna, eat the veggies, the broccoli, the salads, and whatever else. Not
Hmm.
everybody, obviously. There are obviously people who eat meat who also eat healthy and salads and living food and live food and all that kind of stuff. But I'm talking about in general. I think that happens for a lot of people. So I think when you cut that out of your diet, or at least minimize it greatly, now what am I going to eat, right? And you just naturally have to go to, more simple, healthy, whole food, plant-based food options, and that's only going to be beneficial for you, you know.
Hmm.
I mean, thank God, thank God. B'li Einar, like Baruch Hashem, like by default, I eat very healthy. Like, yes, you can be a vegan and not be healthy if you eat like tons of sugar and all the vegan treats that they have out
Yeah,
there now. Like, I don't do that, thank
yeah,
God.
yeah.
Like, that's not my thing. Like, I barely eat sugar, like literally, you know. So if you cut that stuff out, like if you're not going towards like the vegan junk food, by default, you're just eating a very, very healthy diet, and that makes sense for these blue zones. That's why people are living longer.
Do you believe that most of chronic diseases today is connected to a poor diet?
Yes. Simple.
Okay.
No, 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 but
There's a
let's
simple
expand on that, right? We have our own
yeah.
sources, right? We see the Rambam and how he talks about food, and like if you follow a very specific,
Mm-hmm.
diet, it's very powerful, right?
Mm-hmm.
Judaism talks about healthy eating, about healthy living. I mean, that's what this podcast is all about, right? Your podcast in general. So absolutely, like we know. I mean, in somewhere along the way, we kind of like lost the connection. We forgot like food and health are related. Our food choices impact our health. Wow,
Food is
somehow like
medicine.
I don't know, the food industry somehow did a great job of disconnecting that very natural connection for people. But more and more people are understanding that today, which is really great. And Judaism obviously teaches about that because there's so many laws that have to do with health. And so, yeah, look, not everyone, again, I'm not here to like, tell people why something is happening to them or for them, but I do believe that a lot of what people go through um, is related to their food choices, can be overcome by a change in food choices. We are what we eat. We are what we eat. And you see that
Yeah.
idea reflected in Hasidic thought. Like the Nitivot Shalom talks about this a lot. Like our food becomes our blood, and the nefesh is in the blood. Like our soul is in the blood, and like what we eat has a huge impact on us physically,
So
emotionally,
true.
spiritually. So of course, we're caught like multiple times a day. We're putting food into our bodies. What do we expect? Right? It's going to have a huge and direct impact on our well-being.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. There's a beautiful quote that I heard. When diet is wrong, medicine is of no use. When diet is correct, medicine is of no need.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Very nice.
People when they explore the vegan diet, they could get a little afraid about not getting enough B12, iron, omega threes. Do you supplement for that, or do you like? How do you go about that?
So me personally, over the years, B12 I've supplemented on and off. Mostly off, but every now and then I'll get back into it just in case I'm a little worried or take a blood test and it's a little on the low side. Thank God I haven't been low in other things, though I do know vegans who will take a multivitamin just to make sure to cover their bases, but um, besides B12, and even B12 you can get in certain foods easily and readily, everything is found in all plant-based foods, right? You can get everything that you need. You just need to be maybe a little more careful um, and thoughtful about what you're eating to make sure that you're getting all of your dietary needs. But again, people I know will take multivitamins just to make sure. But I definitely prefer just, not taking vitamins, getting from, real food and knowing that again, going back to this idea that Hashem blessed this world, blessed us with all different kinds of food that give us everything that we need. And we're okay. I mean, Baruch Hashem, I've been vegan for 30 years now. And thank God, B'li Nara, thank you Hashem. I feel good. I feel healthy. I see all kinds of other, vegans out there who are very, very healthy athletes and even Olympic athletes and,
Yeah,
and bodybuilders
yeah,
who are fully vegan who are like very they're doing just fine. So, they're proof
yeah,
that you can absolutely eat a vegan diet, get everything you need, no worries, and be happy and healthy at the same time.
yeah, yeah, 100%. In your case, is your family also all vegan, or do you kind of?
So no, my wife is
Oh,
vegetarian. We
oh,
got
okay.
married about 23 years ago. Very few Jewish religious vegans back then. There's a few more today, but my wife is vegetarian, and our kids were all raised vegetarian. And as they grow older, they're all kind of like choosing their own way. I'm still the only full-on vegan in the family, but it's there's no meat in our house. Our kitchen is you know.
Could you
Uh,
share maybe with us what's the difference between vegan and vegetarian for those that maybe don't know?
Yeah, so vegan will not eat any food product that comes from an animal, right? So I don't eat meat, dairy, eggs,
Mm.
fish. Um, Also, it's about like not wearing leather or products that come from animals, no wool, or things like that. Vegetarians will not eat meat, but they will eat dairy. They'll eat eggs, and they might wear leather and things like that.
And fish also, is that's
That's a
pescatarian, right?
pescatarian. Yeah, that's a pescatarian. So
So you mentioned about leather. What about like tefillin? How does that work?
I put on tefillin every morning with joy and commitment, Baruch Hashem. So tefillin is different for me. First of all, it's an obligation. So that is a real
Yeah,
obligation from the Torah. So
that's true.
I've taken on Baruch Hashem the mitzvot, and I have to do it, so I do it. And also, just like mezuzah and Sifrei Torah, um, the leather, the animal skin that is used for tefillin has to come from a kosher animal, obviously, but it doesn't have to come from a kosher animal that was slaughtered. It doesn't have to go through a kosher slaughter, unlike meat, obviously. Right? So kosher meat has to come from a kosher animal and be slaughtered in a kosher way. The leather or the animal skin that's used for tefillin, mezuzah, Torah scrolls, just has to come from a kosher animal, but doesn't have to go through shechita, meaning it could have according to Jewish law, could die a natural death. So it doesn't have to be raised in any specific way or situation. You can find a dead cow in the middle of a field and take its skin and use it for, one
Hmm.
of these things. So for me, that feels different, feels different seeing that in Jewish law, and I like the fact that Jewish law reflects that. But the greatest reason is because it's an obligation, and so I want to fulfill the mitzvah.
Mm. Yeah.
I tell people I'm gonna say something maybe a little bit crazy right now, okay? But if we had a
Okay.
if we had a mitzvah, if we had a mitzvah in Judaism, an obligation, right, that said every Tuesday at 4:31 p.m. you have to eat a little bit of meat. If that existed, that was like mamish one of the mitzvot from the Torah, I would do it because it's the mitzvah,
Yeah.
and I want to keep the Torah.
Yeah.
But it's not
Yeah.
obviously, right? And there's no obligation, right? But I just want to point it out because like friends of mine like to poke me and challenge me every now and then. It's like, what about the Korban
Yeah.
Pesach? Back in the day, if would you have eaten it? Yes, it was an obligation, of
Yeah.
course, right? But it's that like we were talking about before a little bit. That was also a very very different world than the world today. So I just want to say
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. Definitely. In your opinion, do you think the average from family, the way they're eating, is in a way that supports long term health? And if not, what would you recommend for people to start doing, like on a practical level? Maybe, let's say, maybe they're not ready to, become vegan or even vegetarian, but what could they incorporate in their everyday lives for better long term health?
Right, it's a great question. It's interesting. I reflect on my days living in Muncie, New York, for those 5 years. And I was like fully immersed in like a very frum community. And in that community, I saw a
Mhm.
lot of people eating very unhealthy. And I saw a whole sector of like from Jews, Hasidic Jews, like really, really trying to eat healthy and live healthy lifestyles. It was really, really great to see. But I did see a lot of very unhealthy eating. I think we just it's again one of those things we gotten used to it. Like it just like you have a
Mhm.
kiddush, you have like oily kugel, and like
Boom.
lots of like salty, oily, or sugary kind of foods, and it's, feels good, and it's Shabbos, and it's all these things. It's like, okay, but Shabbos doesn't have to be like that. You think
Mm.
Moshe Rabbeinu like ate kugel? Like, come on, like let's get real. Like, so I just think that we've gotten used to certain things. Let's be honest. Also, back in the day in Poland, there were not a lot of food resources available. Let's be honest.
Survival food.
Not really, but man, like when I talked to my grandma about the
Mm.
food, she like listed like 5 foods that they ate all the time. And that's all they ate, and
Wow.
potatoes
Yeah.
was one of them. So they had to get
Yeah.
creative. They had to get like, they didn't have much to work with. Now, like we live outside of Poland and outside of that time period in the globalized society, you can pretty much get whatever you want. Like let's move. Let's
Yeah.
let's be a little bit more creative and let's move beyond what the comfort foods. And so yeah, I think a large sector of the Frum community doesn't eat healthy, unfortunately. Even though there's so many halachot about eating healthy and about living healthy for the reasons that you gave at the intro. So so beautifully. That like the Rambam and others say, right? A healthy body means we can serve Hashem better, and God willing, longer, and that's why we're in the world. So healthy living is
Exactly.
completely aligned. But yeah, I just think people have gotten used to all the soda and all the sugary drinks. It's like, who needs it? Who needs it? And it's hard for people. I get it. It is hard. It was, I grew up that way. But once you make the shift and you stick to it, and your body kind of detoxes, you start to experience flavors you've never experienced before. You start to
So true.
appreciate things. For me, a lightly sweetened dessert with like date syrup is like, you know, like, oh, it tastes so
Crazy. Yeah,
good.
it's amazing. Yeah.
Amazing. A smoothie with no sugar whatsoever. No sugar whatsoever. Tastes amazing to me. Natural fruit,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
we just have to get our bodies used to that, and then we again appreciate all that Hashem put in this world.
Yeah. Also, I think, big companies have really hijacked our taste buds. Every 100 years ago, there weren't these crazy sodas and all these sugary processed snacks and all that things. Like people weren't eating it, so it's difficult. It's mamish a struggle. People feel addicted to these things.
Absolutely.
But as you mentioned, yeah, when you detox it out of your system, it's like a whole different life. It's a whole
Absolutely.
different world.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'll just say one more
Um,
thing today. There's so often when I'm eating, I'm like,
yeah.
I feel so blessed that I am enjoying this simple food. Like I can find enjoyment
Mm,
in this. It's really, there's a blessing to that. I don't need all the extra additives, preservatives, sweeteners, everything.
yeah.
It's like the food itself tastes so good. You know?
Yeah, that's exactly what my wife and I were just talking about yesterday. What would you say to someone that, maybe by this podcast got interested in the vegan or vegetarian diet? What would you say to them? Like, how should they start, or maybe give it like a 30-day trial? What would you recommend for them?
Great question. I would first research and get recipes together so you're all set, make a meal plan. You can find meal plans today online. You got a ChatGPT, put it in there. You literally will have a meal plan for the next month, right? So literally, it's
Yeah,
crazy what's possible these days, right? What used to take like hours and hours of research and doing your own work, you can literally get in a few minutes. You can get a whole meal plan, 3 meals a day, different things, diversity, mixing it up, everything vegan, everything plant-based, healthy, getting all the nutrients they need. So come up with a meal plan, right? Get the recipes, and go to the store. Get to know the maybe the newer different ingredients that you're going to be buying now, and give it a shot. Or even if you want to just say, you know what, I'm going to take one or two meat meals out of my week and replace them with plant-based meals. Even that's an amazing start, right? There's
hmm
there's some people do this thing called Meatless Mondays, right?
hmm
Where they take on Mondays they don't eat meat. I mean, I would expand it to any animal product, right? Like vegan Mondays, like just like one day of the week, go plant-based. See how that feels. Get used to it.
how you feel? Yeah,
There's no pressure, and maybe you'll do that for many weeks, even for a few months in a row. And then, you know what? I want to do this twice a week. This actually works. I like it. And maybe you go up to three and up to four. Even minimizing the amount of animal products that you eat is super amazing for you, the animals, of course, and for the environment. Right? And the more that you do it, the more benefit there is to everything in this world. And I understand, again, it's a challenge to make such a sudden and drastic change. So do it in stages. And again, just the resources we have today are just so abundant and make it so easy. Make the meal plan,
yeah.
talk to people maybe who have done this already, get some advice, what to look out for, what to make sure you're getting. Because some people do, like they kind of jump into it and they don't think about it enough. And then like a few months later, like, oh my God, I feel so tired and weak. That's because you're not doing it right. you know,
Yeah.
you have to make sure you're getting enough protein, you're getting enough, the vitamins and getting enough iron and everything like that. So,
Oh, and
uh,
Shabbos, I just wanted to share with you, but when I was interviewing Michael Kaufman, who you of course also know, he was mentioning. So I believe he has a pescatarian diet that he goes by, but he was sharing with me that on Shabbos we of course have the mitzvah of Oneg Shabbos. But if you're overeating and you're feeling horrible, and the next like Motzei Shabbos and the next Sunday you're like, is it really Oneg Shabbos if that's the consequences of Shabbos?
100%, 100%. I was just literally learning in the Biscuit you wrote that. He details it so
Wow.
specifically, just what you said. He said, the
Wow.
mitzvah of owning Shabbos is not to, like just fill ourselves up and go after every single, desired thing. It's to do it the Kavod Shabbos.
Mm,
And overeating is
yeah.
not the Kavod Shabbos, let's be honest. Overeating is not the Kavod
Yeah.
Shabbos. So, yeah, and it's interesting because, Shabbos obviously it's so special and you want like the nicest foods and the foods that you really enjoy. I love Shabbos, like I eat like I eat like a king on Shabbos, like it's probably like the
Could
only
you
time
share
where
maybe how does like a vegan Shabbos look like?
I mean, like I literally, because I mentioned before, like I eat like kind of smallish meals throughout the day during the week. On the Shabbat, I said I have a meal. I'm like,
Mm.
wow, I'm like so full. So I mean, like my meal. So my wife makes the most amazing sourdough bread every Shabbat, right? We
Wow,
love it,
nice.
and so we start off with sourdough and homemade dips. We'll make hummus, tahina. My wife makes pesto and matbucha. It's like like that's just like a meal in and of itself. So right there, you're already like Shabbos. And then we'll have like some kind of salad along with that, and then roasted potatoes. We almost always have, and then the main dish could be, like I mentioned before, it could be curry chickpeas and rice. It could be, a seitan dish. It could be like grilled veggies with tofu. And by the end of the meal, I'm
Hmm.
like, I'm like so satiated, so happy. And then on top of that, then if I have room, I'll have like a little bit of like a vegan dessert. Either like a vegan ice cream that we buy or vegan baked something that we make. Um, and during the day, it could be a vegan shakshuka. What is vegan shakshuka? It's basically shakshuka without the eggs. You can put tofu in there
Uh-huh.
or falafel balls or whatever. Um, but all different. There's so many different kind of choices. So yeah, I thank God. I enjoy Shabbos immensely. I enjoy my food on Shabbat. And it's interesting because years ago I learned with a Rav in Muncie, who was a Gur Chassid, and he didn't eat meat during the week, right? And you meet people like that,
Mm.
they just eat meat on Shabbat and Yom Tov. One, to make it special, but also two, because of the spiritual elevation, right? There's an idea that we can only properly elevate the sparks of holiness that are trapped in the animals with the power of Shabbat and Yom Tov, and that's why he did that,
Mhm.
right? And I had great, respect for that. At the same time, coming from my vegan perspective, I'm like, we're putting foods on the table in honor of Shabbat, right? What is Shabbat about? Like that God created the world, you know. We're putting foods on our table in honor of the holidays, to like celebrate the fact that we're Jews, that we're alive, that we have these holidays, that God did all these amazing things for us. So, like through the foods we present and put on our table and eat, we're basically like, reflecting. Our appreciation and on a deeper level, the kind of world that we want, right? The
Mm.
values that we believe in, the Torah that we so deeply connect to. So if the foods that are,
Yeah.
are on the table are coming from places that did horrendous things to animals, to God's creatures, right? Whether it's meat,
Mm.
dairy, eggs, or fish. And unfortunately, that's just the world today. 99.9% of meat, dairy, eggs, and fish that people eat today are coming from the factory farming world, which doesn't care at all about the
Mm.
industrialized farming world, which treats animals like automatons, like objects, like products. They don't care about their feelings. It's all about, efficiency and making more money, and they'll pump them with hormones and antibiotics and all these other horrible things. They'll do all kinds of unnatural things to increase their weight and their size and their milk production. How can
Yeah, it's
those
crazy.
foods, you know, be served and eaten in the covered Shabbos? How can those foods be say,
Mm.
I'm honoring you, Hashem, through these foods, even though I know that they caused really incredible pain and suffering to your creatures, to your creatures?
Mm.
That doesn't make sense. Doesn't make sense.
As you mentioned, like 100, you could say, oh, what my grandparents ate it. They didn't eat the same type of like they ate probably the cow was grass fed their whole life. It was living on the farm the whole life. It was a family cow. It's a completely different world. And for people that think that this thinking or this type of lifestyle is extreme, I think, to be honest with you, what's more extreme is that in America, for children, 60%, 60 to 70% of their diet is coming from ultra processed foods. That's insane. And no one's like, oh, that's extreme.
Right.
That's
Totally.
people call that
Exactly.
convenience.
Right,
you know?
exactly. Exactly. I grew up
Yeah.
eating Twinkies, like, and people don't think that was weird. "Oh, you're a vegan? Oh, but you nuts? Who are you? You're radical, you're extreme. What's radical about caring about my health, caring about animals, and caring about God's world?
What's radical about that, especially from a Jewish perspective? That's
Yeah.
not radical. To me, that's Jewish.
Well, Rabbi Akiva, it was really a pleasure speaking with you. How do people, if they want to connect with you or learn from you or with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
So first of all, thank you, man. That was really good to speak with you as well. I appreciate the invitation and the conversation. You can find me very easily online. My website, akivagersh.com. You'll find all kinds of resources there, all kinds of things that I'm doing. I even do matchmaking for Jewish vegans and vegetarians, by the
Oh,
way.
wow.
But you can also find me on social media, Facebook and Instagram. Just put in Vegan Rabbi, you'll easily find me. And I always like to hear from people. So on my website, there's a WhatsApp button you can press and directly WhatsApp me. So feel free to email me, WhatsApp me. I always like to discuss, answer questions, and just connect.
Amazing. Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All the best.